National Catholic Register. This is Register Radio, bringing light and clarity to the news and topics that affect your life.
The Catholic Church in Nicaragua has faced persecution, imprisonment, and exile for decades, but in recent months there's been another uptick of aggression against Catholics by the left-wing government of Daniel Ortega. We talked to ACI Prena's editor-in-chief, Juan Andrés Muñoz, about the Catholic witness against this dictatorship. Then we turned to another Catholic witness, this time against communist China. We hear the story of Jimmy Lai, an imprisoned media mogul who converted to Catholicism. CNA's editor-in-chief, Daniel Payne, joins us for that report. I'm Jeanette DeMello, Executive Director of the National Catholic Register and Catholic News Agency. I'm your host here on Register Radio with my co-host, Matthew Bunson, who is the Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. Our guest, Juan Andrés Muñoz, spent many years as the digital director at CNN in Espanol. Now he's joined EWTN News as the U.S.-based editor-in-chief of ACI Prena, which, as you probably remember, is the Spanish-language partner of Catholic News Agency. Welcome to Register Radio, Juan Andrés.
Thank you, Janet. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.
Have you with us from CNN. We'll talk about that at the end of the show. But this situation for Catholics in Nicaragua has really been tenuous for many, many years. But in the last couple of weeks, really month or so, we have become aware of more abductions. 9 priests we are aware of in the last few weeks, and 2 lay people have been arrested by police. Juan Andrés, what do we know of the situation of these people and these latest attacks on religious?
Yes, Janet. So the Nicaraguan dictatorship has escalated the repression against the Catholic Church in the past few months, days, and even years, specifically targeting the Diocese of Matagalpa, led by the exiled Bishop Rolando Alvarez. Very recently, the government revoked the legal status for Caritas Matagalpa, a key Catholic charity in the country, along with 5 other Christian churches. In fact, most recent reports account for more than 870 attacks against the Catholic Church since 2018. And what you were referring to, this deportation or even like arrest of priests happening, 7 priests were deported to Rome. 6 of them actually were from Matagalpa, a diocese that has been, decimated. And in fact, the reports from the country said that there are barely, any priests left over there. 2 more priests and 2 lay women who were involved with the diocese as well, were arrested over the weekend. So the situation is really bad. Also, the properties of these organizations that have been dissolved are being transferred to the state control, which is actually consolidating the government power.
Yeah, Juan Andrés, I want to ask about some of the background, because for a lot of people, Daniel Ortega is a known quantity historically. Can you fill us in very briefly about going all the way back to the 1970s and 80s with the Sandinistas and why that matters today?
Yeah, let's take a moment to understand a little bit the ongoing conflict. So President Ortega originally came to power as part of the Sandinista government after the revolution in 1979, and ever since has had a tense and very combative relationship with the church, and particularly, as we mentioned, in the recent years. So Ortega, former Marxist guerrilla leader, initially ruled from 1979 to 1990, a period that was very, very turbulent, including a civil war against the U.S.-backed Contras. Then he lost power in 1990 and made a comeback in 2007. And since he has transformed his government into an authoritarian regime, dismantling democratic institutions, silencing opposition, and facing very serious accusations of human rights abuses. And obviously, what we are talking about today, attacking the Catholic Church, is one of the the last institutions standing against the government and the dictatorship.
Yes, and I would add that since I think it was 2018 when there was really some major human dignity abuses, right, and the church really began to, I mean, it's always spoken out, but it really began to speak out, and Daniel Ortega and his wife, who is vice president, Rosario Murillo, really began to push back, right, and that's what we've kind of been seeing is this conflict between the dictatorship and the church and Christian leaders anywhere. So nuns, you mentioned nuns have been expelled. One of those groups is the Missionaries of Charity. A lot of accounts have been frozen, so they're fighting a financial battle as well, in the sense that they've closed down and froze the accounts of the Jesuit Central American University a few years ago, as well as a lot of dioceses have received that kind of financial shutdown by the government. And I think I remember in 2023, so just last year, the Apostolic Nuncio of Managua was closed, basically because of the request of the government and Pope Francis's harsh criticism of Ortega, and they had to close. So this has really been a very tense situation, and really, it's not a surprise that the church has done this. But why is Ortega so set against the church, Juan Andrés?
Yeah. So what you were referring to, these protests in 2018 were kind of the turning point, right? Like basically in April 2018. Starting with university students in Nicaragua, they began protesting against a social security reform that basically called for higher worker contributions while reducing the benefits that people got. So those protests were met with a very, very, very strong hand by Ortega, and actually, according to reports from human rights groups, about more than 300 people died in this repression. So Ortega tried to appease the protesters, canceling the reforms, but then the protests continued, and the church actually was very, very clear, supporting, the protests. I mean, basically the people protesting and the human rights in particular, and that didn't go well with Ortega. And that kind of sparked this very, very, very strong reaction against the Catholic Church. As I mentioned earlier, it's basically Ortega controls everything right now. And the Catholic Church is kind of the last voice standing, and it's annoying him. And that's why he's being so strongly opposed and basically taking all these measures, as you said, multi-pronged measures, like not only, arresting people, but harassing priests, not just by the government, organs, but also by people that, are supporters of the government. That we've read reports about people randomly showing at masses, just to spy on whatever the priest says in the homilies, and then reporting them back to the authorities. So it's a very, very, very difficult situations for Catholics in the country. And yes, it's not only that, but also economically, just seizing the properties from these organizations, from the church, obviously closing media, radio stations, and so on. And just trying to silence any voice that express any opposition to the regime.
Absolutely. We were talking about Venezuela last week, and it's a similar situation there, and thank God for the church and figures like Bishop Rolando Alvarez, who was eventually expelled after years in prison from Nicaragua. We thank God for these voices, and we really want to lift up our suffering brothers and sisters in other countries like Venezuela and Nicaragua. Everybody, you've been listening to Register Radio on EWTN. I'm Jeanette DeMello. I'm with Matthew Bunson and Juan Andrés Andrés Muñoz from ACI Prena. We've been talking about Nicaragua, but I want to turn for a minute to the U.S., to the land of the free. And we have a large Catholic Hispanic population here. This is a group that in your role at ACI Prena, you're going to be covering well and helping CNA to cover as well. What are some characteristics of this group we should know? We're really nearing the end of the show, but I think it's important to kind of turn to our own community here in the U.S.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic for us because we have a huge growth in terms of audience for ACI Prena in the U.S. And we know that there's a need for good Catholic information for this segment. Let's remember that the Hispanic population in the U.S. has grown to approximately 62 million people, making up about almost 19% of the total U.S. population. And this growth is mainly driven by U.S.-born Latinos rather than new immigrants. So nearly 80% of the Latinos aged 18 to 29 are born in the U.S. In terms of the religious affiliation, there has been a significant decline in the number of U.S. Latinos who identify as Catholic. Obviously, it's still the largest Christian group, but it has, declining. According to Pew Research, 43% of the U.S. Latinos now identify as Catholic, down from 67% in 2010. And also a large increase of unaffiliated Latinos, which grown from 10% in 2010 to 30% just last year. So, as I said, Catholics are the largest religious affiliation group among Latinos, and actually Hispanic Catholics are about 45% of all Catholics in the U.S. So it's still like a really, really strong representation among the Catholics in the U.S. and even more among the younger Catholics, like Catholics under 18. Hispanics make up about 60% of this age group. So it's a really, really interesting group that we want to serve very closely, and actually in both languages, because one of the identity characteristics of this group is that, it's not just Spanish, it's not just English. Sometimes it's a mix of both. And we have plans to grow our coverage for the topics that are appealing for this group, and hopefully increase the content that we develop, particularly for these audiences.
You talk about the developing programs, and you are a recent arrival here at EWTN News. You spent many years, I know, at CNN. Very different platform, but what has this change been like for you, especially coming now to a Catholic media entity?
Yeah, for me, this is really exciting. As a Catholic, as a devout Catholic, joining a Catholic news network and working on focusing basically on Catholic information and the Catholic outlook for news is really fascinating. While at CNN, I always enjoyed my freedom as a Catholic, and actually I was known as the Catholic in the newsroom. It was a fun situation for me, and I always made sure that we really covered the topics on the Catholic Church as close to the teachings of the Church as possible, and as objectively as possible. So I started covering the Pope, John Paul II, St. Paul John Paul II. In 98 and with a Cuba trip, and then I covered basically the rest of his papacy and Benedict XVI and obviously Pope Francis, and even I followed Pope Francis in the trip in the U.S. covering the visit to Philadelphia, New York, and Washington for CNN. So as part of the coverage for the Hispanic and Spanish-speaking audiences, like Catholic Church has always been key for my work, both at CNN and now, obviously, even more at EWTN. So I'm really excited. The other thing that struck me the most is having around people that also care about the faith and about the Catholic Church. It's not just me now, the the Catholic in the newsroom. Everybody's Catholic in the newsroom, and it's great to share that and share the different perspectives, because at the same time, we are all Catholics, but we all have different charismas and different, ways of living our piety and our prayer life and everything. So it's great to share that and see the variety and diversity of the Catholic Church within a newsroom, which is amazing.
Andres, we're so grateful to have you. We're blessed by the coverage that your team from ACI Prena does, especially on things like Nicaragua, but also covering the U.S. Latino community and the way that they bless our church. So thank you so much for being with us. We're going to turn in a minute to talking to Daniel Payne about another Catholic resistance. That is Jimmy Lai in China. This is EWTN Register Radio on EWTN News. Stay tuned for more.
Let's return to Register Radio on EWTN.
Welcome back. I'm Jeanette DeMello, Executive Director of the National Catholic Register and Catholic News Agency, your host here on Register Radio, joined by my co-host Matthew Bunson, who is Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. So we're talking about Hong Kong's High Court, which rejected the appeal of Catholic democracy activist Jimmy Lai and 6 others. They rejected their sentences, their request, their appeal to overturn their sentences. And their charge, what they were charged with, is having participated in protests in 2019. So this is a situation of injustice for many people from around the world who just see this court proceeding as kind of a kangaroo court, a real injustice and improper proceedings. But really, I want to ask the question of Daniel Payne, who is our senior editor at Catholic News Agency, who's been covering this for months and months and probably over a year. But Daniel, welcome back to Register Radio, and please, why should we care about Jimmy Lai? I mean, who is he, and why should we care about this case across the world?
It's a great question, and I think you sort of inadvertently touched on it by sort of working to explain just what occurred at the High Court last week in Hong Kong, the Court of Final Appeal there. Jimmy Lai and several other activists petitioned the court to overturn their 2021 conviction for participating in protests in 2019. So just to clarify, in 2024, they're asking the court to turn over a conviction from 3 years ago for a protest that happened 5 years ago. And this sort of Byzantine confusion is what has really marked Jimmy Lai's life for at least the past 4 years or so. He was arrested in 2020 and then rearrested a few months later and denied bail. He has been imprisoned since then. And he has faced multiple trials, multiple charges, multiple convictions for quote unquote fraud, for participating in demonstrations in China and Hong Kong. So you have just this multi-layered aggressive push to criminalize, almost everything this man has done for nearly half a decade. And I think that really underscores why people should care about this. As you said, Jimmy Lai is a democracy activist. He is a Catholic. He's an outspoken Catholic. And he has made it his life's work to push for more human rights in China, to push for better democracy and representative government in Hong Kong and China, and clearly the hammer is coming down on him after all those decades of work, and the Chinese government is trying to break him and make an example out of him. So we can appreciate him as a really profound and eloquent and active advocate for democracy, and we can also appreciate him, of course, as Catholics for his really outspoken and eloquent defense of the faith, and for his profound remarks on how his faith has motivated him to do his life's work.
Can we talk for a second about the deterioration of the situation in Hong Kong? It was established with the Chinese takeover as a special administrative region, I think that was called, the SAR. Now we're looking at a very different situation for anyone who's a defender of democracy, civil rights, human rights, and now obviously religious freedom. How has Jimmy Lai emerged out of this as kind of the icon for the struggle against this slide into totalitarianism in Hong Kong?
Jimmy Lai has actually been at the forefront of so much of democracy activism over there. He has, for years, he published several newspapers, including most famously Apple Daily, which was sort of a tabloid format, but very popular and very pro-democracy publication. It was, well known over there for its pro-democracy stances and its criticism of the Communist Party of China. So that in itself is sort of a very notable badge that Jimmy wears, is that he took on the CCP, which is a really dangerous thing for anybody to do. It's, I think, doubly dangerous for anybody who loudly professes a Catholic faith. The Communist Party of China is not kind to religion. They do not like it when people speak openly about it and about their faith. So he was already, prior to his tribulations beginning in 2020, a very popular member of sort of this vanguard of democratic activists there. And clearly, since his arrest, his sort of a well-deserved cachet has only deepened. People recognize him as somebody who has not backed down, who has been imprisoned and separated from his family and his friends for years now, who has had his assets frozen, who's had his media empire shut down, and he has not backed down. He is, plainly still a critic of the Chinese government. He is plainly still a vocal and faithful Catholic. So, he has been in some ways out of the public eye for the better part of half a decade. And yet, obviously, people recognize that he, in doing so, he remains true to everything he's believed for most of his life at this point.
And really, Daniel, I mean, we're not the only ones who recognize this court as a kangaroo court, right? We're not the only people who think that this is a real injustice. There have been leaders around the world who have spoken out about this, right?
Oh, yeah. We have people in the U.S. and around the globe who have sort of marshaled to his defense. We have U.S. representatives who have nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. We have filmmakers who have developed films that have gone viral, explaining his struggles and his fight against this persecution. We have Catholic bishops who have called for his release. We have broad coalitions of human rights activists that have called for his release. The U.S. Department of State has criticized the Chinese government for the trials and persecutions that it's put him through. So, it is hard to find, good, right-thinking people around the world who do not recognize the injustice of what's been done to Jimmy over the past several years, and who have called for remedies to it. So he has a lot of friends in a lot of high places, and sadly, it hasn't been enough yet to see him released and see justice for him. But he is certainly not without supporters all over the world.
Right, but he is in solitary confinement in prison, and that's a serious and lonely place to be. We know a little bit about how he spends his time, because Catholic University installed in their Catholic University of America there in Washington, D.C. has some artwork that was done by Jimmy Lai that was installed last year. It's a crucifix that was drawn. It's a really, really beautiful way to be in solidarity with him. Just as the closing remarks of this show, we got a couple minutes left. What do we know about Jimmy's faith and how he's handled this moment?
He has spoken very eloquently about it, and he has tied his faith very directly to his work as a democracy advocate. He says that he can't turn away from this work because doing so would turn him away from God, as he put it in so many words. And it's plain that his faith has energized him and made him more convicted in his work as an advocate for political freedom and for civil rights. So he's plainly sort of been galvanized by his faith in Christ, and that's been something that's been a part of his life for nearly 30 years at this point. He came into the church in 1997. His wife was already Catholic. He was brought into the church by Cardinal Joseph Zen. So his faith has sort of stood the test of time, and he's plainly still clinging to it in the best way possible. And you mentioned that drawing at the Catholic University of America. It's a really gorgeous and stunning work of art, depiction of the crucifixion with very sort of Chinese artistic overtones, but it's unmistakably this beautiful representation of the crucified Lord. And if we know if you know anything about solitary confinement, you know it can be a brutal and psychologically, ruinous and punishing experience to be alone by yourself for so long. But he has plainly drawn inspiration and strength during that time from his faith, so much that he can still create this beautiful art that gives us inspiration and faith all the way on the other side of the world. So he's really a wonderful figure to admire and emulate in his own right.
So I absolutely agree with that. At one point in time in an interview, he said that the Lord, through this experience, the Lord teaches you that your life is not about yourself. What a beautiful, beautiful statement for someone who has really given his life works to fight for democracy and human rights. So Daniel Payne from Catholic News Agency, thank you so much for covering this for us, for EWTN News. Anybody who is listening can go to CNA, CatholicNewsAgency.com, and search in the search bar there Jimmy Lai, and Lai is spelled L-A-I, and you can find more about this story and join in praying for him. Remember, for more news, analysis, and commentary, to check out the National Catholic Register online at ncregister.com. As always, thanks for joining us on Register Radio here on EWTN, together with Matthew Bunson and my producer today, Ace McKay. I'm Jeanette DeMello, and until next week, may God bless you.
For more information about the National Catholic Register and about Register Radio, go to ncregister.com. Podcasts of Register Radio are posted on ncregister.com and on EWTN.com. Join us next week at this time for Register Radio on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.